And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the Monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have 1, 2, 3 good brothers. Ah ha ha ha. First we have the man who is solely responsible for me pestering Discami games. Because Mark will be coming back in a few days. Good brother Nephenor.
Greetings. Now come sail with me. Come sail away.
We have the man making hardcore games for hardcore gamers. Good brother Jeremy.
SuccessorGames.com. Sun death is upon us.
And the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadare Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
I can't say the line I want to say since I'm Chaos Incarnate, so instead I will say, I will kill Order.
Yeah, if you were to say you were going to kill Chaos, I would say, I do not approve of suicide.
Kill myself every Tuesday.
Always look on the bright side of life. Yeah, I can't whistle to save my life. But I've made it very clear that I am a fan of adaptation and adapting various works, especially adapting them to the tabletop. And I love when somebody takes that opportunity, and does it well, which is more than I can say for some people. Renegade, I'm looking at you. No, you won't. You will not be forgiven. Just because you put out an okay attempt at redemption with G.I. Joe and Transformers does not mean you're getting off the damn hook. That's the reason why I never reviewed the other two games in the Essence 20 system, because it was just kind of eh. Plus, while I enjoy some G.I. Joe and I enjoy some Transformers, I don't consider myself familiar enough to tackle that topic. The only time I will possibly do those is if I can get somebody to consult.
Yeah.
And of course, I've covered the numerous takes with stuff like Lord of the Rings, stuff like Star Wars. I plan on doing Star Trek in the future. I just need to get some certain resources. Plus, there's a bit of a backlog to account for. And there is also the fact that there are some attempts that are less equal than others, but those are all official matters. That's not even getting into the fan stuff, and in particular, the fan stuff with Final Fantasy. Now, of course, Zan and I have our particular project.
Yes, sir.
But there is also But we are not the first. In fact, a lot of us are building on the foundation that was created through the original Returners group. Not the Returners in FF6, but the collective pen name of the people who had worked on the early version of the Final Fantasy TTRPG way back in the late 90s. And the furthest I have of that is the second edition of it. I have yet to find first edition. The version I first found was third. And of course, then things branched off in an interesting line of succession over the years, which I covered when I did FF Week on the channel. But as we were working on this, and especially after I did the From Tales to Tabletop video with Daniel Santos, I started to ponder why it is that other franchises in the console RPG space, which have a sizable chunk of the audience, haven't gotten that same treatment. And I know it might be tempting to say that there's a difference between people who like console RPGs in video game form and those who like it in tabletop. I don't think that's applicable. That kind of thing might have been applicable like in the 90s, but not in an age when there's so much audience crossover between everything. Mostly because of how accessible so much is. And to that end, I decided it would be an interesting thing to explore how easy or difficult it would be to adapt other TTRPG franchises. Not TTRPG franchises, console style RPG franchises. English monk. And thus you have the title for this week. Tabletop's fantasies are not final, which is me doing a double pun because one, I like using the running gag of the parentheses not in from the Ava rebuilds, at least until they went with a different approach with the Ava rebuild. And two, there was a tagline on the back of the box for the game Eternal Ring, which is an interesting entry in From Software's library. Though saying interesting in From Software's library pre Dark Souls is kind of redundant. FromSoft kind of went all over the place. I mean, on one hand, you have stuff like Kingsfield. On the other hand, you have Ninja Blade, and then of course you have the Seminole Armored Core. But then you have Murakumo, which I still have. I don't know why I still have it, but I do. And it just escalates from there. But that is the intent. So over the last week, I ended up making a short list, which the good brothers and sisters of the temple can see, that contains a handful of franchises. There were a few rules that I wanted to set. One, games that are PC style, even if they're available on consoles, are not permissible. This is the reason you're not going to see Mass Effect on this list, because one, Mass Effect's already had a few adaptations already, one of which almost got into the Origins Award before they realized it would cause a problem and took it off. and two, there is a reason why I still insist on using the terms console style and PC style, even if you can get either on both platforms these days. The DNA is still there. Something like Mass Effect is still in the vein of PC style. It is a PC style built with console controls in mind, but it is still PC style at the heart of its DNA.
Yeah.
I talked about this in the long reaction video that Zan and I did when Dev was being an idiot.
We've talked about it ad nauseum at many different places, but yes, the one where we tore apart the bad assumptions Dev made in his particular video, Yoshi P and the JRPG.
Mm-hmm. But what I'm specifically referring to is most console-style RPGs will have the trinity of town, field, dungeon.
Yeah.
Some will play around with the concept a little bit, but you will see that somewhere in it.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
You go into town to prep. You go out in the field to practice and level up. Then you go into the dungeon for the real test. Then you go into the next town, get better equipment, and repeat the cycle.
Yep.
This was established by Dragon Quest, and it's been a staple ever since. Although I will maintain that Dragon Quest didn't really start as we know it until 3.
Also true.
That's not to say 1 and 2 are bad games. It's just they were
Not as we know it. You're right.
they were kind of in they were. I liken them to how there are certain bands in the late 70s and early 80s where you can make the argument about them being either hard rock or metal, because it was in that transition phase where the idea of heavy metal hadn't quite been established yet.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a bunch of acts who are in between. Now, the other thing that I wanted to make explicitly clear is Zelda is off the list. I know some people, especially those who have been playing nothing but Breath of the Wild for the last 2 years, will say, how is it not an RPG? Zelda has always been an action puzzler first and foremost. And even with the open world stuff, that hasn't changed all that much. It's just added some mechanics that Zan and I are not fond of, and the reason why we're not going to be jumping at the first opportunity when it comes to Tears of the Kingdom.
Weapon durability is a shit.
Out of curiosity, how would you rate the old Ultima games?
They're PC style RPGs.
Yeah, they are PC style. Yeah, even the ones that were adapted to even the original NES, it was all first on PC.
Because they do have a very similar style of, the 3-year field, the town, dungeon. They've got that same mechanic going on.
Some of them.
I'm talking the old ones, not the newer ones.
The reason why I don't is Ultima has. I've always felt that Ultima in its earliest days was an evolution more of the choose your own adventure style of game books. Not choose your own adventure is a bad example. A better example would be stuff like Lone Wolf and Fighting Fantasy. Especially since you have a solo character, that being the avatar. That is the focus. Whereas Wizardry, which contributed more to console style RPGs, had a party focus.
Mm.
But and Might and Magic, the Heroes of Might and Magic ones as well.
Heroes and Might and Magic is a different beast than just Might and Magic.
Oh, sorry, yeah, you're right. I was thinking Heroes, or just regular Might and Magic.
Yeah, regular, and even with that, those particular ones are still leaning into the dungeon crawly approach that was kind of pioneered with Wizardry. This is also the reason why games like Dragon Quest and even Shin Megami Tensei and the original Phantasy Star like to have that semi-first-person perspective when it comes to battle. That was an artifact of Wizardry.
Yep.
And there's also the fact that most of the people who were playing Ultima were not playing it on console. Much in the same way that most people playing Civilization are not playing it on console. I mean, you can. It's just that's not where people are playing it.
Yeah.
Now, the big reason I will note before I get to wrap it up when it comes to the Zelda thing, I'm not sure the reason why Zan is not a fan of the weapon durability, but for me it's a case of weapon durability and the weapon types don't give themselves enough of a reason to be present.
My biggest thing is that when it comes to the Legend of Zelda games, and this isn't a design by gospel thing, but this is a case of Link is supposed to be the archetypal lone monomyth hero's journey type person.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, there comes a point where they do get that one special thing about them that allows them to overcome hardship. That doesn't. It only fails them when they fail themselves, like when they have doubt in themselves. Which, Link, being the avatar of courage for all of the Zelda series at this point, he doesn't tend to doubt himself. But weapons. So from a thematic scheme, picking up all those random weapons, yeah, that makes sense as a lone hero that's going out. But having them all break all the time, that doesn't fit any lone hero. They should really only break, to heighten tension or something of that nature. Now, from a gameplay perspective, the reason I don't like the weapon durability thing is it's a needless resource management on top of all your other resource management.
That.
From a gameplay perspective, it's unfun.
Yeah,
especially
it's unfun.
Especially if you, for example, have stockpiled on quite a few weapons to really prepare for fighting something difficult, and they aren't enough. Especially once you start getting to the highest level of enemies in the game, where you get the black bokoblins and the black moblins and the silver Lionels and everything. You, in some cases, unless you're cheating the game essentially by getting as many bomb arrows as you can during a rainstorm, killing things becomes a chore. And even the one weapon that should not break, the Master Sword, it has a cooldown, quote unquote, which is not only unfun gameplay wise, it completely fucks the lore. The entire lore is ignored with that. So there are multiple reasons, as both a fan of video games and a fan of Legend of Zelda in specific, that I have issues with the weapon durability thing from both a lore perspective and a gameplay one.
Yeah. Now, getting back to the matter at hand. We will. As I mentioned before, I have a list. I have a list in front of me that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 entries.
That's not a short list, Monk.
I'm grading on a curve. And the idea is we're going to be going through these and seeing how easy or difficult it would be to go with. And I know some people will say just use GURPS or just use Besom or whatnot, but I don't. But you all know that I do not like the notion of using a universalist game as a one-size-fits-all solution. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of universalist games I like. I like Besom, but there's a reason I keep picking on GURPS simps. You know, you can use GURPS for virtually everything. Yeah, you can if you've got a fucking TI-83.
You can use GURPS for virtually everything if you tweak it just enough. That's the thing that I don't think anybody ever gets about universalist systems. Yes, you can use them universally, but by being that general, getting specific facets down is not going to be easy.
No. And not necessarily fun, again.
That's the big one right there. And I do remember when somebody said I could use mutants and masterminds to run a Sentai game, and I'm like, that's gonna involve everybody making multiple character sheets at once you throw alternate form into the mix. Plus, there's the issue of advancement. Most characters in any tokusatsu aren't going to be advancing vertically; they're going to be advancing horizontally.
Yeah.
So my reply to people like this these days, Monk, is sure you could use mutants and masterminds, GURPS, etc. You know, something that fits at the very broadest definition. to make X game, just like you can put a pistol to your forehead and fire. But I would not recommend doing either.
Mm-hmm. So, we'll be going at the top of the list and going downward. The first one is Breath of Fire.
Yes.
I think BOF would actually be pretty easy to develop into a tabletop.
I'm really surprised that this hasn't been done more.
There's a few things that I can see can make it easy, and a few things I can see that would make it difficult. One of the things that would make it easy is the master system that was introduced, I think, in it was referred to as the master system in 3, but it was kind of tooled around a bit as far as the idea of it in 2. As far as partnering up with a certain NPC that expands your kit.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
you're talking about the shaman system in 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I look at that as kind of a prototype for the master system you'd see in 3 and 4.
Well, the thing there is that it was tooled around with even in 1, technically, with the fusions forms that certain party members could become.
Yeah. There is one particular problem, and this is a problem that I referred to as main character syndrome.
Yeah,
you mean the fact that only one person has dragon powers?
Right.
Yeah.
So you make it easy there, Monk. I'm sorry, but we know from the very first Breath of Fire that there are dragon clans of people who are descended from the specific dragons.
Accurate.
So you could, at that point, instead of making everybody Ryu, you just make everybody a Dragon Clan member that wants those types of powers. That make it a racial ability.
I would only do that on the condition that other racial archetypes are made just as unique. And
absolutely.
And
I think that there's plenty of room in the lore for lots of things.
I mean, we've always had a Nina who's always had some form of wings.
Correct. And we haven't ever established whether that's an entire people or not.
That's actually established in 1.
Oh, that is. Yes, that was established in 1.
They just
don't play on it much.
Yeah. It's just like how in 1 we are shown that more than one person can turn into dragons when Ryu's own sister does so as a boss in the end of the game. Also, fuck y'all, I can hear you in the comments now. Spoilers, man! That game's over 30 years old!
Oh, yeah, come on.
Statutes passed.
I mean, well, I don't know if there's any brand new ones, but even all the way up to
one was 6, I think, and 6 I think killed the series.
6 was on mobile. The last one that was on console or anything like that was Dragon
Quarter,
which some would argue was a killer because of how vastly different it was as
it was so vastly different, but I liked it. I liked it a lot.
Dude, Dragon Quarter was good. And
what a cool dungeon crawler that would be in a TTRPG.
Well, and on top of that, the entirely different way that the Dragon Quarter system worked, you could make a variant clan rule for that type of gameplay.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I would utilize that as a case of this is your workaround if you are not a member of one of the dragon clans but are able to get it because a dragon chooses you.
Okay.
Because that's basically what happened to Ryu in Dragon Quarter.
I can't remember
until you replay the game and you actually have D-Factor 1/4.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, everybody, the reason Dragon Quarter is called Dragon Quarter is because it measures the fraction of Ryu's bloodline that is dragon related, which starts very low in the game.
Yeah.
But depending on how quickly you finish the game and how much D powers you use, etc., you can get your dragon quotient all the way up to 1/4.
Mm-hmm. And To that end, I know some people would say, would you utilize the Dragon Gene setup in 3? No. No, I would not.
Okay, so I would counter with you can use the Dragon Gene setup in 3 to help design each person from the clan's one dragon.
That I'd be fine with, but I would just be against the idea of utilizing multiple.
Well, I mean, I would not allow even with the normal clan system that we have in mind, I would not allow multiples. Again, that does become main character syndrome at that point.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of give and take here.
And would you mind being the evangelist as far as what I mean when I talk about main character syndrome in TTRPG design?
Okay, so as far as I understand it, and correct me where needed, Monk, main character syndrome is where if you're taking something and adapting it from, in this case, Breath of Fire, main characters in these types of stories tend to have more powers than a normal adventurer would. So much more because they are the main character of the story. If you're using them as inspiration, you have to find a way to break down their vast gamut of skills and abilities and inherent traits and piecemeal them in a way that still makes you feel like you're playing that archetype without centralizing the game on yourself.
Yep. To put it another way, this is why I've had such a hard time when it comes to running a Common Rider RPG. Because there's been
Common Riders are all main characters.
not only that, but the sole reason that something like Common Rider can get away with all the utility forms that we've been seeing over the last 23 years is because of the fact that they are largely solo.
Yeah.
So
when it centralizes things on you, that's when it starts to become main character syndrome.
Yeah, this is also the reason why I don't mind, say, the multiple armor types we saw early on with Gundam Seed, because the only one who was using a Gundam at the time was Kira.
Well, and the guys who stole the other Gundams, but they only had one Gundam form.
Mm-hmm. But you had Zaft, who had multiple Gundams with different roles, and then you had Kira, who just had Strike.
Yep. And Zaft stole those Gundams from them in the first place.
Yeah. But the point is that because of the fact that you have such a limited combat party in that case, you can get away with multiple roles, but you can't really get away with that with a TTRPG. The other reason for the whole main character syndrome ties back to a story regarding Star Wars Galaxies that I've told in the past.
Yeah, when they wanted to implement Jedi.
They wanted to implement Jedi. Ralph Koster didn't want to because he felt it would fuck up the in-game economy. They forced him to do it. He tried to make it difficult. That was a bandage, and it ended up screwing up in-game anyways.
Mm.
Ethereal points out that main character syndrome is like Buffy in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer RPG, or the hero in Dragon Quest. I think the hero in Dragon Quest doesn't apply, and we'll talk about that more when we get to Dragon Quest.
Mm-hmm.
As for Buffy, is there anything about her that is any more to her other than having main character plot armor that any other Slayer would not have in the Buffyverse?
Not
that I can think of.
Not necessarily, and later on, especially when Angel shows up, other Slayers have shown up as well.
Yeah, so I don't think that Buffy has main character syndrome being the central character of the show, but I don't think she has any powers any other Slayer wouldn't have. And so I think just using Slayer as a class or whatever.
Yeah,
you'd be okay.
I'd probably lean towards archetype instead of class, because I do remember running a Buffyverse campaign using Hunter.
Okay, and I use class as a colloquialism, as you know, Monk, because
Yeah,
everybody recognizes that term.
Yeah.
As for
I feel
Breath
like
of Fire,
Breath of the Fire 4 had like wasn't there like a dog people or something in that? Like
The grass runners.
okay, and then like robots and stuff
yes, and then of course
or armor guy.
you're talking about Ursula, I think.
Oh, okay.
No,
And Ursula
I,
is
I feel like there's enough
Airship,
content
yes,
to create
Urshin.
peoples and cultures and lots of classes associated with it. Like was it the dog a mercenary or something?
He was also trying really hard to be Goemon.
Yep.
Okay, well sure.
Let's just remember that Folu is best character. So
and of course Folu had by his side for early on and on the cover art Wong Ku, who is a Kirin in all but name. Because and a lot of people end up overlooking 4 because of the fact that it didn't have the dragon genome thing in 3. But what it did have was a much stronger sense of identity about itself, along with a more unique art style. I liken it to how
Totally.
4 had a significantly Asian Asian feel.
Did. Yeah.
The use of Ryong is the Korean word for dragon.
Okay.
And there was also the fact that it had a kind of cel shaded design for its characters.
Yeah.
And as opposed to the previous games which have had that pastiche approach that we've talked about in the past, especially 3 was 1 and 2 were certainly pastiches, although 2 was a pastiche, had a pastiche as well as fuck religion, and 3 had a pastiche that also started adding in more high tech elements as the story went on, and 4 had a bunch of elements, but definitely had a far more Asia and sometimes Fertile Crescent approach, especially with the desert. And also remember, Arshin is always right.
well, I mean,
Always.
there's a reason Arshin is always right. Again, spoiler embargo's been over for years. It's Dace.
Yeah.
It's Dace inside an armor, and she is a god, or an endless as they're called.
Does that mean that Arikawa was ripping off Breath of Fire 4 when it came to Alphonse?
Probably.
I don't think so, because I'm pretty sure Breath of Fire
You will
4
never know.
I'm pretty sure Breath of Fire 4 came out after he started writing.
She
started writing, excuse me.
Oh.
Well, the idea of ghosts embodying armor that's
old. That's a yokai.
That's old.
It's old. It is a yokai. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had to be a smartass.
Actually, let me check something here. You might actually be right with the timing, though, at the very least. So she probably had the idea before she started writing, but she did only start serializing in July 2020 or 2001. Monthly Shonen Gangan. But yeah.
So yeah, a TTRPG of Breath of Fire would be amazing. I think that the art direction, using 4 as the art direction, maybe even Dragon Quarter, because I kind of dug Dragon Quarter's art direction too. But I think that the most flexible is 4 for art direction. And I'm a Chrome head, and that's when I fell in love with everything Breath of Fire was when 4 came out because of the art.
Yeah,
I fell in love with Breath of Fire when it broke my heart with a theme that has haunted me since I was...
That is a good theme.
It's the Epitaph of Alan and Searle from Breath of Fire 1.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Although there was a special spot in hell for whoever decided to utilize the U.S. cover art for Breath of Fire back on the Super NES.
Which cover art?
I don't remember.
The one that was just the logo?
No, for the original Breath of Fire, the one that tried to make it look like Golden Axe.
Oh,
I know that was a thing. I know that was a thing all over the place at that time, but
yeah.
that doesn't mean I have to like it.
Hold on, I'm gonna post it in council. He's talking about this one.
Yeah, I was thinking that's the one you were talking about. Oh, God.
Yuck.
Ryu looks nothing like that. I don't know why they did this.
That is just terrifying.
They did it because that was a look of a lot of things at that time.
Everybody remembers the original Mega Man US box art.
Oh gosh, stop. That was the worst.
I think we're going a bit rails here, though, guys.
I mean, looking at that art right there, I'm just about ready to say, you are already dead.
Gosh, I remember that. Oh, that's so bad. But again, I do remember Snake Lady. There's another, people.
Yeah, that's Dace.
Yeah.
That is Goddess Dace, although she was called Blue, or Bleu if you spoke French.
But no, as far as what sort of system I would use as a basis.
Yeah.
That is where things get a bit tricky. Part of me wants to be a real smartass and say a heavily hacked version of H&H.
I think H&H is probably a little too grungy for Breath of Fire's brightness, though.
That is true. I was tempted to use Fireborn because that does also involve dragons, but Fireborn wants to go a more modern approach with its dual era system. So that would be out of the picture. I think Fantasy World might be interesting, but an easy one to work with would actually be Knights of the Round Academy, especially since the Shonen expansion is now available to me. It wouldn't take too much to adapt Breath of Fire into various archetypes. And of course, that's assuming I don't make something from scratch, which I wouldn't want to, but I could in theory do it. So that brings us to the next one, which is one that I have a long history with. That being .hack.
We both have a long history with that one, Monk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the point that I made when we were talking about it earlier is because of the levels of abstraction that the .hack games have, being a single-player RPG imitating an MMORPG would make adaptation difficult.
I would be willing to go with it for one reason, and that is that Fragment exists.
I understand that.
Existed. Truth be told, between the original EMOC, Infection, Mutation, Outbreak, and Quarantine, and the GU trilogy, I honestly think EMOC would be easier to work with.
Probably true. The story is a little bit more ensemble cast than GU is, which is very much Haseo-centric.
Mm-hmm.
And so Haseo has a lot of main character syndrome, such as Xth form and then 0th form, and then the list goes on.
there's also the other reason is while there is a bit of main character syndrome when it comes to both Kite and Tsukasa, because of Fragment, you have an approach that you can utilize, especially since the way these spells are written out, kind of like a code.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where you can predict what a spell is going to do once you recognize the pattern.
Now, I think what we'd have to do if we're going to adapt .hack as a series, regardless, is the same thing that we criticized Avatar Legends for not doing. And that is, we need to make this a sandbox that doesn't necessarily fall into any of the events of the actual stories therein. In which case, it would be much, much easier to adapt, because then you already have like the classes in the game, and you have how the gate system works and how monsters work on the field. It would very much evolve into almost a hex crawl in certain ways.
I have stated in the past that .hack was a bit ahead of its time for reasons pertaining to the mission-based type of online games. Not necessarily MMOs, but more MORPGs.
Yeah.
That are focused solely on hub and mission. Examples of what I mean is stuff like Dungeon and Fighter, or Dungeon Fighter Online here in the States.
Phantasy Star Online.
Phantasy Star Online. Vindictus. Elsword. Granado Espada.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're not doing a whole lot of the exploring on a field. You have a hub, and then you're picking missions.
Yeah.
And because of that, it would be very easy for a GM tool to use the keyword system as a random dungeon generator.
Absolutely.
As well as using the servers as a difficulty level, because that's basically what they are anyways.
Yep. Delta Hidden Forbidden Holy Ground.
Yeah, the other thing I would obviously put in is the concept of mysteries. These are things that these would be little story seeds that you could put in about something not being quite right about the world.
Like the initial mystery of a ghostly girl in white found at the Holgrand's Cathedral in Delta Hidden Forbidden Holy Ground.
Yeah, some areas not acting like typical dungeons. Some areas where you have monsters that seem to have infinite HP. I wouldn't go the full thing of introducing the bracelet or the Key of Twilight, but during downtime you can easily have a forum phase.
And but I was going to say, not involving the bracelet or the Key of Twilight was, again, you have to decouple the game that you're making from the story events, because otherwise you start getting to the point where people are going to feel limited.
Yeah, and I would argue that would apply across the board with most adaptations of a console game to a tabletop. Remove it from the story that's going on in the console. I don't know anything about .hack, but it seems like from what you guys are saying, I'm like, man, this sounds cool. Let's play. But
no, you should play it. You absolutely should. I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, it's 2 sets of PS2 games. Finding the original quadrology, IMOC as we called it, is expensive.
Okay.
Because it's never been sent to PC, and finding copies of the actual physical discs is hard. And then with .hack GU, just look up .hack GU Lost Order, I believe it's called. It's a collection of the first 3 .hack GU games, which were all we had for 15 years. And then we got a fourth game that was a sort of super epilogue to everything that happened in the first three games.
Wow.
When that collection came out, it's on PC, it's on Steam.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So,
But yeah, to the point, to Zan's point, I mean, I really, going back to Breath of Fire, I wouldn't want to put it in any of the settings of particular events in any of those games, but just take the elements of the world and allow for story to take place. I think that if you're going to try to shove something into a story or scenario that's already in a console game, that gets really tricky.
and the sandbox in Breath of Fire, all of the games, is much easier to develop than the sandbox for Dot Hack because of the particular idiosyncrasies.
Okay.
And as Monk is suggesting, making it a sort of mission-based system where the keywords and the servers are randomization and
that all
difficulty
sounds really
respectively.
fun, actually.
Yeah.
As a TTRPG, and I know nothing about it, but those mechanics all sound fun.
And Monk, remember that a lot of the time when you clear the dungeons from any particular set of keywords, depending on how well you did in the dungeon, it gave you more keywords. You could totally make keyword drop tables from further and further randomization.
Yeah, the other thing, there's also the fact that each of the dungeons have that whole notion of field, then the floors, then a boss, and then the final treasure. And of course, with a field, there is one little gamble that you can do before going into a dungeon that I'd be almost obligated to include.
Which gamble?
Throwing a weapon into the lake.
Yeah. Do you want to know the thing I always did that my friends always looked at me weird about when I was playing Emok?
Mm-hmm. What?
Clearing every monster gate on the field.
Because you're as much of a completionist as me.
They didn't realize that actually does something mechanically until I showed them. It actually affects some of the treasures and keywords you can get in certain dungeons. It was funny.
Yep.
But like I said, you do have all of the defined classes because it is, like I said, it's a game trying to emulate an MMO as a single player game. Which means you have skill lists you can take from.
Well,
all of that.
This is where things get a bit interesting, because as far as the game I would utilize to do this, because of its emphasis on getting loot. The big one that comes to mind is Cypher. One that I would have to significantly modify and mess about with the effort system.
Mm-hmm.
But Cypher is what I would use as a basis because of the fact that it has its own version of a loot system built in.
Mm-hmm.
Because with Emok, the kit that you had access to in terms of your skills was dependent on your equipment.
Yes, your weapon changed what certain skills you had, which is why I was always going around looking for twin blades that gave me staccato, because that fucking move is busted.
This is also the reason why it would be absolutely vital to have an equipment system that can be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as the GU entries, like I said, they because of the focus on Tsukasa, there's not on Tsukasa, on Haseo, there's significantly less to work with outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I don't want people, even though it is doing an ensemble with the people chosen by the epitaphs.
They're all main characters.
Yeah. And as much as I love GU's more steampunk design, it's just not going to work. There was a Japanese tabletop of Dot Hack called Infinite Generation. some of the materials for it are on the .hack wiki, but I'm not entirely sure if I would use that, because it does feel a bit light. I mean,
Mhm.
saying a Japanese tabletop feels a bit light can be a bit redundant, with a few exceptions. Looking at you, Sword World, but it doesn't quite scratch the itch, is what I'm saying.
Mm.
And within, I would say the only problem I would have with Cipher, aside from the pool and effort mechanic, is the way Cipher handles character creation.
Mm.
Because the way Cipher does it is, I am an adjective, noun, who verbs, which describes your type, your descriptor, and your focus.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And because of the fact that everybody's playing as humans with one exception, that is good.
One exception. That exception doesn't count either, Monk.
Yeah. And that's the reason it would be kind of tricky. Um, if I were to use Cipher, I think there might be a few other possibilities, and well, um, a hacked version of Dungeon World wouldn't be too far off base either. I only just got Fantasy World, so I haven't had time to dive into it, but that could just as much be a possibility. So, moving on from that, we go to Dragon Quest.
Aww.
Okay, let's get one thing out of the way. First two games, putting that to the side.
Okay.
Because in those ones, you kind of were the sole protagonist.
Yep.
You didn't really have a party of sorts in 1 and 2.
Yep.
Yeah, true.
3, you outright did, and of course, 4 is one of those ones that everybody cites for one reason or another.
Mm.
But fortunately, even though there have been job systems within Dragon Quest in a few entries. I think 5 did it. Um, I'd have to double check. And of course, there's the fact that 10 was an online game, so you already have the class options there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in I remember in 8 had that interesting set of sub skill developments.
Yeah,
But
so I was thinking of.
one of the things that makes doing this kind of tricky is the fact that the majority of the games that have kits that are very character focused.
Mm-hmm.
And but it would be somewhat easy, but it would still be tricky. I do remember one person wanting to use Dungeon Crawl Classics to do it, and I'm like, no.
Mm.
Uh, Especially since there's some unorthodox weapons that you have to account for. Like, say, boomerangs. Boomerangs have been a staple in Dragon Quest in one form or another for years.
Yeah.
But I do think truth be told, if there's one if there I do think that if you instead go on archetypes instead of classes, um, against the Dark Master would be interesting to work with in that. You might have to make some changes, but you're gonna have to make changes with all of the ones we're gonna be talking tonight.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how much. The goal that I have would be picking one that would require the least amount of changes.
The least amount of changes?
Or at least the least amount of extra legwork.
I don't think we'll be able to find one that's at the bottom of that hole.
No,
there are going to be a few that sit there, though there will probably be ones that we can point out that are more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's also the possibility that one could hack Ryutama a bit to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'd say Ryutama would be relatively easier to work with because it does have that broad archetype setup.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that in mind, would I include the tension system that was in the last few games? I don't know.
I would include them as variant rules.
Variant rule I'm perfectly fine with, like having psych up as a universal action.
Yeah,
that's as far as I'm willing to go, though.
And that's fine.
Mm-hmm. So next on the list we've got Fire Emblem. Oh boy.
I think Fire Emblem would actually be really easy to adapt. This might be one of the easiest ones.
One of the potential easiest ones. I am leaning towards Fire Emblem working better as a skirmish war game than a TTRPG.
Yeah, I was thinking the same kind of thing. It just does not work. It's not as. It's kind of like. Okay, what am I thinking? It's got a lot more Warhammer to it than it does Warhammer Fantasy.
I have no idea what you mean by that.
It's more tactical than it is roleplay.
You said Warhammer versus Warhammer Fantasy.
Yes, yeah, I was thinking Warhammer, the actual war game, Monk.
Yeah, Warhammer, the war game, the tabletop, miniatures game versus Warhammer Fantasy, the role-playing tabletop game.
You should have said Warhammer Fantasy Battle, then I wouldn't have gotten thrown off.
Yeah, no worries. I was thinking first edition of that because it's been ages since I played that version.
But there is one game I can think of where that does have a class advancement tree the way you have class advancement in Fire Emblem that might work, but you're going to have to build the class system from scratch, and that is Zephyr, which I have reviewed in the past and I have interviewed its creator. And part of the reason I say it would be tricky to work with is Zephyr, much like Lancer, is very married to its particular setting.
Right.
I'd say the part that's going to be difficult is you would have to create a kind of vertical slice of all the different class trees that have appeared throughout the series.
Would we want to go into that much minute detail?
I think in terms of what we did, where we ended up taking a bunch of stuff and then whittling it down to what was absolutely necessary.
Yeah, well, because the variations between like Lord and then the upper levels of Lord tend to just be stat advancement. And whereas you can keep the concept of Lord, the archetype, and just let it develop in its way from there, I think you could really boil it down to just the specific archetypes, and any of their additional branching advancements are not going to be something you have to stat out in full.
Yeah.
Make it part of the schema for that exact, like, let's go with swordsman and how swordsman has its branching advancements. Instead, you make it that, like, you reach level 5 swordsman, and then you choose one skill or specialization that would normally be found on one of those branching advancements.
Now, that being said, one thing that I would definitely not be doing is the durability rules that weapons and spells have in the video games. Yeah, miss me with that bullshit.
Well, you could do the spell thing with spell charges, but the weapon thing I agree on.
Oh,
Because spells in Fire Emblem are fairly powerful.
yeah. The only reason I would be hesitant has to do with the fact that we have everybody focuses on the weapon triangle, but some people forget that spells have their own triangle that they have to account for.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that we would have to account for. I'd be fine with a base spell that is the type of basic attacks, and then more beefed up spells that do require charges. And if that sounds like the AEDU setup of the edition I'm supposed to hate, but I don't. If you're gonna steal, may as well steal from the close to the best.
I mean, we at the temple always give credit where credit is due.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll give credit due there, even though it is part of the series of the most litigious RPGs.
Yeah. And to that end, when you mentioned that sort of upgrade setup, I was half tempted to bring up the way the first edition of Dark Heresy handled advancement. Remember where you had this selection of things you could advance once you had spent enough total XP on a certain thing, you would be able to go up to the next rank or shuffle into something on the side.
Mm-hmm.
I think it could be done in that form. It's just a matter of the key thing is that the first class in that particular case is going to be either fighter or mage.
Mm-hmm.
And then branching into more specialized affairs as you rank up. And when it comes to the idea of a hero class, I'm not even sure if I'd even put that in.
Well, and there wasn't really a hero class. In Fire Emblem, it was a lord. And there were multiple lords. You could get multiple lords in some games.
I'd only
they
put
weren't
in lord if I can establish a specific kit.
I think the lords did have a specific kit, but that's something that we'd have to look into if we were going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this is all just spitballing. So
yeah.
But the lords weren't necessarily super units. They were definitely not like you throw the lord out there and you're gonna win. You had to be very, very careful, in fact, because Death of the Lord was usually game over.
Mm-hmm.
But they were definitely their own unit. I know that. So there's definitely a kit out there we could probably find to establish.
Yeah. Now I do think that if I was doing it as a miniature war game, lords are your HQ.
Well, yeah.
That is one of those goes without saying kind of things. Now that brings us to Golden Sun, which I am keeping an eye out to see if anybody inevitably makes a spiritual successor.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Golden Sun would be intensely difficult to actually adapt because of how the class system is based on what genie you have equipped. And you can't really extend it to the wider world because it really is just the main characters who are equipping genie.
Mm-hmm.
It makes for a really difficult way of building the game because the genie are integral to the Golden Sun experience.
There is one game I can think of that could work as a bit of a hack in that, even if it means you'd have to add one more core attribute,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the Worm engine, i.e., Warrior, Rogue, and Mage.
Yep.
In this hypothetical, instead of Warrior, Rogue, and Mage, you would have the four elements.
Okay. But the question then still becomes, like, yes, everybody had their own base element, and then their classes would change based on what you equipped them with, genie-wise.
Mm-hmm.
But then the question still remains: how are you going to emulate that? Because the genie are, that's going to be the clinch. That's going to be your pinch point. That's going to be your bottleneck. Is how you implement the genie system.
Yeah, I would say in that instead of your fire your four course. Are you familiar? How familiar are you with Warrior, Rogue, and Mage?
I will admit I am less familiar with it than I should be.
Well, first off, I will note it is a game you can get for free.
Mm-hmm.
Second, hang on, let me see. Okay, why is it not showing up? Yeah, give me a. This is there are upsides and there are downsides to having a massive TTRPG library.
Yes.
But and the one of the key pitches with Warrior, Rogue, and Mage is that those aren't is that those three that particular trinity is not your choice of classes. Rather, they're your core ability scores and
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
referenced. And those will cascade out into other forms. Um, example, it also of course applies to your available skills along with the kind of feats or spells or skills that you can have trained.
Mm-hmm.
Let me. And there's also the fact that it applies to the core stats that cascade from it. The approach that I'd end up taking is from what I recall, the kind of spells that were available to each element did follow a bit of a theme. Much in the same way that the spells that are available in color types in Magic follow a consistent theme. approach that I would take is that the the attribute is more of your cap when it comes to the types of Jin that you can equip. I realize that I am kind of stretching things, but I think there's enough of a foundation to build around.
Yeah, but this one is probably one of those ones that's really high up there on difficulty to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of my point here.
Yeah, difficult, but not impossible.
I never said anything was impossible. I just said difficult.
Of course, there's also the fact that you only have 3 games to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost Jeremy.
We did a while ago.
I was.
First half.
But next on the list is Lunar. I'd say Lunar would probably be one of the easier ones to do.
It'd be easier to do with the world that we have. Again, as with most of these games, you need to divorce things from the stories they're in.
Mm-hmm.
The only real issue I would see is that there are going to be people who are fans of Lunar that will insist on like seeing the dragons or finding Dragon Master equipment, etc. Because, well, Lunar. But I could think of those more as like doing quests for the actual Dragon Master of the time or whatever.
When you're talking Lunar, you're talking Silver Star Story?
Silver Star Story and Eternal Blue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just making sure we're talking the same thing here.
Yeah. Why do you think I mentioned the Dragon Master equipment and the multiple dragons?
That being said, there is. I would say that there would be an issue when it comes to there not being a character class to build around. But in a roundabout way, there are plenty of hybrid archetypes that are still fallen into that you can build around. I would say for something like Lunar, it would be imperative to have a system that allows for multi-classing right out of the gate. And truth be told, there is one game that I've been studying, and I want to make a video on when I'm able to finish my research. That would work perfectly, because it's one that I send you updates on regularly whenever the translators put out something new.
Yeah, Monk, I'm gonna say something here. Sword World is gonna suit a couple more things on this list.
Probably.
I can already tell you it's going to suit probably at least 3 more.
Mm-hmm. So, because when you think about it, there are a lot of characters within Lunar that could be considered dual class characters. And you have essentially a fighter summoner in Alex, and you have a fighter rogue in Hero.
Mm-hmm.
In Jean in 2, who was Best Girl, is pretty much a bard monk. I'd say bringing in the equivalent of Lucia would be completely out of the question. But both both 1 and 2 had your spellcasting adept who always came from or was associated with Vayne.
Yep.
And in fact, the original Lunar had 2. It's just one of them had the greatest comb fu you could ever ask for.
Mm.
There's whatever the hell Kyle was.
Kyle?
Aside from drunk.
No, Kyle was Kyle.
Yeah. But the point is that there's, even though there isn't a class system with Lunar, there's repeat archetypes that you see from 1 to 2 that you can easily work with.
Mm-hmm. I would like to point out that there's no fucking way just as we couldn't have Lucia, we also couldn't have Luna.
Yeah.
Because Luna is literally just the mortal form of Althena.
It would be amusing to have somebody like that as an NPC, but no. And the only reason I say it in an NPC form is because of how Lucia in 2 was not a party controlled character.
Mm-hmm.
She would just use random spells from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, more as the story develops because of the whole having her powers taken from her. So, which is why it's really best to grind as much as you can when she is your automatic nuke button.
Mm-hmm.
But moving now is, I know some people say, "What about Dragon Song? What about Dragon Song?"
Dragon Song isn't even a main series game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's officially a spin-off.
Yeah.
So fuck y'all.
But then we get to one that I think is going to be on the tricky end of things, and that is the Mana series.
I don't think it's going to be tricky.
Or rather, I would say it's tricky, but I know now when it comes to the elemental spirits, those have been consistent throughout, so that's something to work with. But as far as combat, do you want to know the one game that I think I would use as a starting template?
What's that?
Legend.
Okay. For combat specifically? Okay.
For combat specifically, because Legend had such a robust approach to weapons that
yes,
I can't afford to pass that up.
Which we stole.
Mm-hmm.
Wholeheartedly.
Oh yes.
But yeah, I can see that. But much like this is the second game where I was saying things that saying that much like with Lunar, a lot of Sword World could really be useful for mana. For a lot of the things within Mana series.
Well, with all the elemental stuff, that's got Fairy Tamer written all over it.
Mm-hmm. Now you know what you know why I say these things, Monk.
Yeah. The other thing is, the other reason why I know some people who are really big fans of Secret of Mana would say, why not use that as a base? You've got two problems. One, you're utilizing one particular character throughout, so you have that main character problem. Two, do you really want to do the whole you have to stand there and do nothing while your weapon charges?
Recharges. It's to go from 0 back to 100.
Yeah, recharges, but still, I wasn't a fan of that system.
I understand. I will counter with most mana games are the one main character, Monk. The original, I think what was that version called? Sword of Mana, when it was finally not called Final Fantasy Adventure.
Yeah, there is that. There was also the one that for the longest time was called Seiken Densetsu 3, which was one of those things we thought we would never get.
Trials of Mana, Jesus. I I was very happy about that, and as you can see from our nice little title board leases there on the left.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, you did choose who your party was going to be in Seiken Densetsu 3, but whoever you chose first was your main character, and you rode their story. You got their unique dungeons and bosses, and the unique final boss as well. The biggest thing with the Mana series is that, again, since we're divorcing everything from story, it doesn't matter what the whole NC main character issue is, because we can build everybody to be a main character, especially with the elemental spirits. Jeez.
Yeah, and because I know it'd be tempting to use some OSRE game for this, but those games don't handle Gish well, especially since if you try and go with if you try and go with the OSR approved stuff and have to deal with OSR approved spell casting. If I choose not to do that, then the Grogs are going to scream bloody murder, which is why I say fuck the Grogs.
Yep. But the Mana series is actually quite easy in the end to adapt to tabletop, in my opinion. Simply because we don't need to use the examples of the characters, just the archetypes which surround them.
Yeah. Now, let's see what's next on the list. Parasite Eve. This one's going to be tricky. Especially since if there's anyone that has the main character issue the most out of the ones we've covered so far, it's this one. If I have to utilize it if I have to go with it without and utilize, say, the book as frame of reference, which takes place before the games, maybe take the approach of something with the Gumshoe engine.
I can kind of see it.
The reason I lean towards Gumshoe with this is Gumshoe is built around investigation, and that is a major motif with Parasite Eve. I mean, Aya was a NYPD detective before being transferred over to Mist in 2. And
but we don't talk about 2.
Yeah, there is the issue that ended up happening of the games of 2 trying to be more like Resident Evil. I'd say it's largely due to the fact that I don't think Parasite Eve really built itself for a sequel. The original game being a follow-up to the novel, that's only if you really dive into it. Like it is very easy to miss the references to the original to the original novel. In fact, I'm pretty sure most people knew it as a game before they knew it as a novel.
At least in the West.
Which that novel did get adapted into a film, but if you watch it, be prepared for bad CG.
Is it any worse than the Final Fantasy movie? The CG one?
There are multiple CG Final Fantasy movies at this point. If you mean the Spirits Within,
yes.
No, Spirits Within has better CG.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how far I'm going with this. But
yep.
If somebody really, really wanted to implement the mitochondria stuff, I would probably put that under some kind of sanity system.
Hmm.
Uh, because there aren't really archetypes that can be built around. And I know that there was that DNA board in the third birthday, but that thing was way too RNG. Along with
We
some
don't we don't talk about the third birthday either.
mm, uh, so that brings us to Fantasy Star. This one's so easy it's already been done, especially ever since the online games.
Hmm.
I mean, you already have a class system to work with. You already have a race system to work with. You can implement optional sub abilities that from universe. You
Yep.
can, as far as whether or not I'd use some of the kit that was presented in online 2, probably not. That's a little bit too character actiony for my taste.
Hmm.
And I love character action to death, but that's kind of hard to emulate.
Yeah, character action is extremely hard to emulate on tabletop.
Yeah, I would say because of the setup that you have, um, this is actually a case where as long as you don't utilize the casting system, um, something like the black hack I could easily see working,
Hmm.
because you for all intents and purposes you only have three classes: hunters, rangers, forces.
Yep.
With one of and when it comes to race, you have human, Newman, Beastman was introduced in universe, and casts. And with casts, you have an easy way to make the beginner's first character, because casts can't use techniques, and they're immune to all but one debuff.
Yep. Robot people are immune to debuffs.
Yeah, and Universe gave them a sub weapon ability, which is more of a nuke than anything else. Beastmen had their werewolfy form that was known as Nanoblast. I know a lot of people don't like Universe, but but it and online do provide a good template to build around.
Yes, absolutely.
There was one attempt called Ragdoll's Curse that was made as part of a 24-hour challenge that does have a good foundation to build around. Uh, and as f- the although the key thing is that it is still going to be centered around loot. Especially since I think Sonic Team outright admitted that one of their inspirations was Diablo.
That
The
actually
original
wouldn't
Diablo.
surprise me.
The original Diablo specifically, which that I can definitely see.
Yeah.
Now, if they said the inspiration was Diablo 2, that I would find a bit suspect, because for one, the timeline wouldn't match up, and two, I never saw a skill tree in any of the Phantasy Star Online games. Uh, if somebody wanted to really be crazy, maybe they could implement card. I'm not doing that.
Hmm.
But then we have the Saga series. Oh boy.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Oh boy, definitely sums it up.
I mean, the Saga games aren't going to be that bad. Especially looking at the early Romancing Saga games.
I think it ultimately depends on which games we use as a template. Romancing, but I'd actually say that whichever one we utilize, I would encourage the GM to take a passion play approach.
You'll probably have to elaborate for those who don't understand that terminology, Monk.
This is coming from my experiences with Ars Magica, and how there is kind of a built-in assumption that each player is going to be managing multiple characters throughout the story.
Mm-hmm.
In that same vein, let's consider how a lot of the Saga games, and this is also why I believe Octopath Traveler to be the spiritual successor to Saga. You are going through the storylines of multiple characters. Sometimes they may intersect, but you essentially have a hub of multiple stories you're going through.
Yep.
I could bring up how this all ties back to Live Alive, but we've talked about that already.
Live Alive is so good.
And
we won't get into that.
Mm-hmm. We already talked about how that was one of our white whales. But moving right along, the one Saga entry that gets a lot of hate that I would not use as a template is Unlimited.
I don't know why Unlimited gets so much hate. It's actually a really good game.
Unlimited is a good game, but it does a bad job of explaining its mechanics.
I can admit that. Yes, that's true. But I'm not sure. Like, my introduction to the Saga series by the proper name Saga was probably everybody's introduction to the Saga series by the actual name Saga. You know what I'm talking about. On the PS1.
Yeah, that would be Frontier.
Yep.
But I would say the thing that makes adapting Saga tricky is it goes all over the place.
Absolutely.
This is also the reason why I had thought about putting Department Heaven on the list, and then I realized no. because all three of the Department Heaven games may as well be different games unto themselves.
Yes.
That was of course that was by design, but it is still something to note.
Now, in that case, which do you think is going to be better to adapt? The Romancing Saga 1, 2, and 3 games, or the Saga Frontier style games?
As tempting as it would be to go with Romancing Saga, I don't think so.
Okay. So we want to go with the Frontier style games then.
Frontier still has a variety of mechanics that I can utilize.
Okay.
And in particular some subsystems with Saga Frontier 2, which that also gets some shit, and I don't know why.
I have seen the Saga games shit on in recent years when they were beloved in previous years, and I don't know why. So don't ask me, Monk. But that is Rails.
Mm-hmm. But the truth be told, because of the sheer variety of style and setting throughout the series, even just in individual games.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think Saga Frontier is a case where you would have to use a bit more of a universalist system.
Well, I can see that. The big thing here is that because of how the Saga Frontier games have worked, we aren't going to have a problem with main character syndrome for sure, because you can have your own cast of characters who cross paths with each other and have their own adventures just as easily.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the combat that you have to nail down from Saga Frontier series, and that's
The whole thing of hit points and life points, that would be easy to work with, because we've had something in that vein since Unearthed Arcana all the way back in 3rd edition.
Mhm.
You know, and plenty of games have had a hit point and wound system.
yeah. I mean, obviously that's not the only facet of the combat system I'm talking about, but yes.
Yeah. The way the types of arts and the types of anima also is something that could be worked with, and in that regard, I'd probably build it into something not far removed from the sphere system. Actually, the sphere system would work pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are roles in Saga Frontier 2,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd hesitate to call those classes.
Yeah, they really aren't.
Um,
So in this case, we'd have some of the spheres system for the combat and character development.
Yeah, and I'm specifically referring to spheres of power and spheres of might, and more recently, spheres of guile.
Yes.
Because that finally came out.
Mm-hmm.
And when there has been in Romancing Saga, you had the whole thing of tech points and magic points.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm being honest, I would probably combine that into energy. But one thing that I would definitely do is something that I've seen from Destino Obscuro and RuneQuest, and that is the whole learn by using kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, putting it instead of having it where you learn by using when it comes to individual spells, it's more of you are able to advance on that particular sphere by using. That'd be one of the easier ways to do it, because the other option would be leveling up, and I think you can have both.
Mm-hmm.
You can level up, but you're only going to be getting so many, but you're going to be getting more stuff through the whole learn by use approach. I would make the learn by use a die roll, so you don't have what you ended up having in, say, Elder Scrolls,
Mm-hmm.
or for that matter, Final Fantasy 2.
Yeah.
And when it comes to utilizing, say Romancing Saga, or Romancing Saga was essentially was just what as far as was well, the one I had played was Minstrel Song, and that was just a remake of the original.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think I know that Romancing Saga used the Vancian model. Fuck that shit. I'm not doing it.
Oh, I know.
But I wouldn't. I know I said I'd use the sphere system, but I wouldn't use the sphere system as it's written in Spheres of Power. Instead, I would treat the weapon and anima classes as their own spheres. As you develop, you can either learn a new sphere or develop in the one that you already have. I'm just using spheres as kind of the basis on how I'd approach it.
Mm-hmm.
I know it'd be tempting to say that to use Sword World with this one, but I'm not but because of the weapon classes approach, I'm not sure if it would be a good fit. Not unless we make a whole new bunch of classes,
Mm-mm.
along with messing around with a skill system, because, well, Sword World doesn't has a skill system, but not in the traditional sense. It's the main way you level up skills is through, say, Ranger.
Yeah.
But there's a hand. I would have to do some further research if I was to do something Saga related, because there's a handful that I haven't touched. Uh, like Emperor's, Imperial, and Re-Universe. I'm not sure if those are mobile or not. I'm just looking at some of the elements in the wiki.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a formation system in Scarlet Grace, but I would not be keen to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see. I just checked. Imperial Saga was a browser game that was exclusively on PC, and then it got remade into Imperial Saga Eclipse. Re-Universe is a mobile game, so fuck that. Scarlet Grace came out, but some people didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
I think going with Frontier is probably the best idea here, Monk.
all things considered, yeah.
And I think we've established a pretty good baseline for it.
Mm-hmm. But let's see. Next we got Suikoden. Okay, let's use Legends of the Woolen for that for maximum irony.
I didn't even have to say anything.
But
I Monk, even if it's for maximum irony, you literally just hit the nail on the head. So, like,
yeah, no arguments from me here.
is that going to be one of those enough said moments?
No, in truth, I wouldn't even use it, because while trying to do a class system with Suikoden is pointless, even though the one Suikoden TTRPG I was able to find did.
That sounds like stupidity on their part.
What I would utilize instead is the skill system that's been pretty much a standard. I think since 3 was the first time that we saw the letter grade skills that you could equip.
Mm-hmm.
That is the approach I would utilize. A series of basic skills and a series of special skills that are essentially an alternative reward for GMs to give to players.
Mm-hmm.
There is kind of a main character issue, but not as bad, because you're dealing with a silent protagonist, but it's one of those they shouldn't be silent kind of things.
Yeah.
With all of the entries.
Yep.
And for those saying that the reason they're silent is so you can put yourself in that perspective. If that's the case, then why are you giving them background of being nobility every single time? Whether it be Tyr is the son of a noble. We had a son of a noble in the first 2 games. In 3, you are the flame champion. In 4, I think 4 you are more of a corsair, and 4 seems to be treated as a black sheep for some reason. Once again, don't know why. 5, you're a fucking prince. In tactics, you were the lead strategist for a band of mercenaries. Like, you have way too much baggage within the setting in each game to justify a silent protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that is going to that would make Suikoden easy to work with is eventually you always have some kind of holding.
Yep.
Something that'd be tricky. The magic system.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how you'd implement Suikoden's magic system.
It's a Vancian model. That's the problem.
Like I said, I'm not quite sure how you'd implement the.
The only
I guess you'd have to either keep it Vancian, which is not an exciting prospect.
Although the funny thing is that the amount of slots that you have are determined by your intelligence stat. The approach that I'd probably take is the effectiveness of the rune is rooted to rooted to one of your ability scores, and the higher it is, the more you can do with it, and just put in a instead of it being a per day kind of thing that you have to do a short rest for. No, it's per scene.
Mm-hmm.
There's four levels of each. If I wanted to, maybe you could have it that you have to distribute how many slots you have in each level. But that leans a little bit Vancian. I'd instead go with like a universal MP. Let's say 20.
Mm-hmm.
And each level has a different MP cost, but as your casting skill gets higher, they get cheaper to cast.
That could work.
But I am doubling down on the skill system. As far as things like mass combat and duels. Well, mass combat, I can just steal the mass combat system from Seeds of Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Or I was going to say the one from Adventure Conqueror King system or the one from Exalted Second Edition. Both of them are too crunchy for that. Plus, there's the fact that both combat and mass combat operate on a rock paper scissors system.
Mm-hmm.
I am leaning towards Seeds of Wars for it because, for one, being a lord is part of the motif with Seeds of Wars. I'm currently working on a review of that.
Mm-hmm.
And two, Seeds of Wars already accounts for how magic should work on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to make my job much easier. Does it kind of mean that there has to be skirmish spells and war spells? Yes. But in Seeds of War, spells is a type of resource. Much in the same way that you have resources in 4X games.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tricky, but not as tricky as it could be. If I was using Axe, I would have to hack the shit out of everything, especially since given that Axe is based on BX, it's not going to have a skill system to work with in the traditional sense.
Mm-hmm.
And while there are some recurring motifs like say a Falcon style swordsman or swordswoman throughout. That kind of thing I would treat as special skills. Both prestige classes and specialized roles, those would be special skills. This I would also probably bring over the custom weapon system we have because Suikoden really loves its weapon variety and really loves having characters use non-standard weapons. Since only when you look at the protagonists in each of the Suikoden games, I'd say only one or two of them uses what you could call a standard weapon. That being in 3 and 4. In 3, you've got a knife. In 4, you've got a sword, long sword and short sword. But one, you've got a staff. Then two, you've got tonfas with weird-looking handles at the top, but tonfas nonetheless. Um, and in 5, you have a Sansetsu cone. Again, and do I not constantly encourage weapon variety?
Yep.
Like 5 had a Nagamaki, for fuck's sake. Who the fuck uses those? They should be used more often, and especially since it's like a. For those unaware, a Nagamaki is the consider it the halfway point between a katana and a naginata, or it's essentially it's essentially a halberd that wanted more sword. Like I said, encourage weapon variety, people. And if I'm writing a GM chapter for a Suikoden RPG, that's one thing I'm bringing up. I do think that there are two things that a Suikoden RPG should have to double down on, though. One of them is some kind of formation system. So this is one place where you do want to have your front and back row. Two, I'm thinking that there should be some mechanical use to the 108 stars.
That one would be harder to implement because of the amount.
It'd be harder to implement from the amount, but if it's just a slight bonus, that'd be somewhat easier to do. You could probably work on the theme of a lot of the heavenly and earthly stars being either nobility or commoners.
Mm-hmm.
And I would probably put in that there is that each of the true runes has some sort of price to them. I.e., it has a lot more options when it comes to spells, but there's risks to having them. Especially if some idiot stumbles upon the sun rune. A whole lot of power and a whole lot of crazy.
Yep.
But then I just realized I have to apologize in advance. We skipped Star Ocean.
You skipped Star Ocean.
Yeah. Okay. As I know, even though the creator of Star Ocean cited Star Trek as one of his big inspirations, I would not use any of the Star Trek RPGs for this. I would say the main thing that we would have to build around would probably be the beat system that's been introduced in The Last Hope and Integrity and Faithlessness.
Okay.
In terms of having a broad archetype setup, and this is something that I'm also saying would apply to Tales of. Mostly because you can have a Venn diagram between the two due to the origin story of Star Ocean. I think we all know how that went down.
Mm-hmm.
Although there is a small part of me that would love to read a translated version of the original Tales of Fantasia story. But I don't think it's ever been released.
I don't know.
I don't even think the original story has ever been released in Japan, and obviously Namco would probably be kind of spiteful about the whole Wolf Team situation.
Mm-hmm. But that's Tales of Monk. We're still doing Star Ocean.
Yeah. But Beat, which stood for Battle Enhancement Attribute Type, could kind of be seen as a bit of a class system or more of a archetype system.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say in that regard, you only have 3 archetypes. You have fighter, you have caster, and you have Gish. But I wouldn't have it that you're picking one of the 3 types as your quote unquote class, but more of every time you level up, you can put that level into either fighter or caster and start developing combat or magical skills, or you can go into and um the lowest of those is the level for the hybrid,
Mm-hmm.
where you can utilize both. Hybrid would be the equivalent of the Universalist class in Kingdoms of Amalur.
Yeah.
Uh, the big problem. I'm not saying I'd go full anima with it, but there is one thing that I would keep that's in anima,
Hmm.
and that is the notion of creating techniques.
Okay.
Uh, Now, as far as the whole thing of physical techniques taking away your HP until the end of time, no, I'm not doing that. As much as I loved abusing MP kills until the end of time, it wouldn't quite work in a tabletop setting.
Well, not only abusing it, but there were certain things that couldn't be beaten by anything other than MP kills.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different story, though.
Yeah. I do think that item creation is something you'd have to really double down with. That's been a staple throughout the franchise.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why I'd focus on the beat system is because that's a that is a setup that we can utilize very, I won't say universally, but it provides a good template for us.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as bonus battle, well, bonus battle ends up becoming irrelevant mid-game anyways, so why should we bring it in? And truth be told, I tell a lie. There have been 3 types um of beat. Strike, burst, and neutral. The way they initially had it was strike is offensive. Burst is defense, and neutral is a mix between the two.
Mm-hmm.
The way they had it is that strike gives you boosts to attack, intelligence, and hit, whereas burst gives bonuses to max HP, defense, and guard, along with a few action upgrades as you develop. Whereas neutral just gives you the benefits of both based on how you've leveled it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say we could probably expand or retool the beat system to work for us. But that's the big thing that comes to mind. I still haven't played the Divine Force, so I can't comment on what we'd steal from that.
Same here.
Oh, and I will note that synthesis and those kind of item systems would be tricky to work with, but I think it can be done.
Okay.
See, I know that there was I know that there was the there has been stuff like private actions, but that seems a bit too character focused.
Yeah, that one would probably attach too much.
Mm-hmm.
We want to keep things divorced, as we've been saying.
And when it comes, I do think that because that the other reason why I'd be hesitant about using the Divine Force is that one's going full on action.
Yep. And I super want to play it because of it.
Mm-hmm. But that brings us to the Tales of series. And truth be told, a lot of the stuff we said with Star Ocean can apply just as much to Tales.
I actually don't think it can. Not with the changes that were made in the more recent versions of the games that got away from the whole fixed combat thing.
Yeah. First off, that any sort of fixed combat, obviously the only way we could do it is if we use that 9-zone movement system that we saw in Convictor Drive.
Yeah. And ultimately, due to the way the setting and the powers work, this is another one of the games that I said Sword World would be perfect for.
Yeah, I can see it. When I did the episode talking about adapting Tales into Tabletop with Daniel, I had mentioned going with an archetype system, and I was kind of thinking of a simplified version of what's in Against the Dark Master at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the big problem with this and with a lot of games is that there isn't really a archetype framework to build around. Tales has repeat names for spells, but when it comes to physical arts, that's where things get tricky. I mean, obviously, yeah, there's some variation of air slash all the time, but that's not enough.
I think at that point you'd have to look at the Japanese nomenclature to see what names are shared there, just to determine which moves are the same lineage.
Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, Amnesis had two roles referred to as invoker and healer, so you could kind of use that. As far as stuff like blindside, honestly, I'd use blindside kind of the way we use parry in our system.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a high risk maneuver, but one that allows you easy counterattacks if you can pull it off.
Yeah. But yeah, this is the third of the three games that I said that I was thinking would be perfect for Sword World.
I will state I'm not using if I'm doing Tales, I'm not using an MP system. I'm using the CC system, and I am not hearing any arguments on this.
Makes sense to me.
And truth be told, the use of the CC system that would provide the best template, I'd say it's Grace's F.
Okay, I can see that.
What with the A and B type skills.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, Grace's F is really underrated in the Tales series.
Also true.
Yes, the Wii version. Yes, the original Wii version was buggy as hell. Everybody knows this, but that's not the one we got.
Mm-hmm. I would argue that up until the most recent Arise, Tales of was still very much a niche game.
Yeah, I can see that. The big reason why I've always had issues with Tales using an MP system is the combat doesn't suit it.
Mm-hmm.
Although, in a weird way, there's some things from Anima that I'd steal for the magic system in both Tales and Star Ocean. Namely, the way Xeon and accumulation works.
Yeah, I can see that.
Do you remember the details on how it works, or would you like me to give the skinny?
I'd have to open the book again. Go ahead.
The unlike a lot of games of spellcasting systems, spellcasting is not necessarily fire and forget in Anima.
Mhm.
You are spending a certain amount of Xeon, but your accumulation determines how much Xeon you can spend towards the actual cost of that spell.
Mhm.
If your accumulation is high enough, then yeah, you can cast that spell instantly. If it isn't, then you might have to take several turns accumulating. Um, you do have kind of a similar thing with Key, but that's a whole different ball game, especially if you don't use the unified key rule,
Mhm.
which early on I didn't, mostly because I didn't mostly because when I did that campaign, I did not have the Exet books yet. They didn't come out yet.
Yep.
Uh, but I think you can see how I draw the parallel between that and the way spells have to be charged in Star Ocean and in Tales.
Yes.
Uh, but that now, as far as I would still go with the whole broad archetype approach, which is why I was considering something like the way sorry something the way that Sword World develops is one approach. Although I do think we would have to mess about um when it comes to the class system.
Mhm.
It does unfortunately mean that um the idea of every time you level up in a class you get that level's spells, that is something we wouldn't be able to carry over. Um, I'm honestly thinking that it would that a custom spell system would probably be better served. You know, some sort of build a spell as well as build a technique kind of things. It's just
Mhm.
as you level up in those archetypes, you have a bigger cap.
And yeah, bigger budget.
Hmm. Um, and truth be told, the one game that I think would work well for both of them, probably Valor. I would have to house rule the magic system, but Valor is an interesting beast, one that I may consider. I'm debating whether or not I should do that should be done as a Valley of the Judged or as a review. I'm still 50-50 on that. Plus, we've got a good amount on our plate as it is.
Indeed. I was about to
So,
say more valleys, Monk.
but then we have Valkyrie Profile.
This is one of the more difficult ones again.
All right. I'm getting this out of the way first. Not using Covenant of the Plume. I've got my besides the fact that it's taking a completely different approach, I have my own issues with it. Plus, um, if you it, plus I'm not a big fan of how Covenant of the Plume outright punishes you if you don't use the feather, but using the feather is an easy way to get the bad ending. Um, Chaos
I,
Rising had the same problem as far as the Dawn of War 2 expansion.
yep.
Um, now there is kind of there is kind of a class system when it comes to the Einherjar. I honestly think the best approach for it is one, the Valkyrie does not show up. At least not show up in a playable way. Nobody plays as the Valkyrie. Instead the Valkyrie is your is essentially the GM. Basically, Einherjar are set out to go about with certain missions to try and delay Ragnarok.
Yeah.
I feel that's the best angle because bringing in the Valkyries is bringing in that main character issue.
Yeah.
Even
And
if
then it'd be really hard to determine what Einherjar each Valkyrie would have, and et cetera, et cetera. Instead, making the players the Einherjar makes a lot more sense.
yeah, the plus the you can have a story game approach of uncovering the Einherjar's past.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could easily do the motif that once they start out, they are in their peak form, but they do not have their memories.
Mm-hmm.
And as you develop and are spending more time in Midgard, you get more of that. Um, obviously it would
Get
be
more of their memories.
yeah, obviously it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to replicate a lot of the combat systems in Valkyrie Profile 1 and 2.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of concessions made here.
Mm-hmm. And I think most because of the fact that we're just doing one slight change, I think most fantasy games could work for Valkyrie Profile. We may have to adjust a few things, but considering the wide variety of fighters and mages and the like that were present in the Einherjar roster for both games, even if the second one was a little bit too samey with its Einherjar.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a foundation to be worked with, because
Yeah.
with two you essentially had four types of Einherjar no matter what. One-handed swordsman, two-handed swordsman, archers, and mages.
Yep.
I think instead you just have light attackers, heavy attackers, ranged attackers, and mages.
Magic. Yep.
And to that end, instead of having them be classes, it's more of an archetype that ties into initiative. I.e., instead of rolling for initiative, it's on a phase-based approach.
Okay.
So, in that regard, it would go light melee. I'd say light melee, ranged, heavy melee, magic.
I can see that being fair, considering how powerful magic could be in Valkyrie Profile.
Mm-hmm. It also means that mages have to be careful, because since they're getting resolved last, the situation that may make them cast what spell they wanted to might end up biting them in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, mages end up being a more advanced character to play, as far as having a somewhat higher floor, but not in the I'm gonna nuke everything on the field automatically kind of way.
Yeah.
Now, I do know that there was a mobile entry with Valkyrie Profile recently. I'm not talking about that one, and the more recent one, Valkyrie Elysium.
It's action.
It's an action-based approach, and it is a full-on reboot. I know some people were hankering for it to focus on the original continuity, but if you've played Lenneth and Silmeria, where else is there for the story to go besides a prequel, which is going to bottleneck what kind of story you can tell anyways?
I mean, there's one other direction the story could go, Mike.
What?
The obvious end? Because what are the Valkyries trying to prevent the entire time?
Except,
he's got a point there. That is an ending.
The only reason I'm not conceding it is because in one of the endings for the original, it already happened.
That doesn't count, and you know it, because the second game couldn't exist if that ending was the ending taken.
Still, I feel like going with going with that might be easy way
Fighting.
out.
I don't think fighting in Ragnarok is the easy way out, Monk. I'm in fact very sure that fighting in Ragnarok is a very, very hard way out.
Yeah, I'm just there. I think it's the issue of there wouldn't be enough meat on the bones because we know how Ragnarok ends.
Ah, but it's how you get there. But yes, I'm just saying that you asked.
It's not the destination; it's the journey.
I mean, you're not wrong, but that's not the point I'm getting at here. My point was to be purely pedantic and prove Monk wrong when he said what other direction was there to go except for a prequel. And I'm like, well, there's the other direction.
Yeah, but as far as because there are a lot of people clamoring for Hriest to get her own game. Problem is Hriest has way too much baggage to be a protagonist.
All the Valkyries have way too much baggage to be protagonists. Technically, not even Lenneth and Silmeria should have been protagonists.
Well, if we want to get real pedantic, Silmeria wasn't the protagonist.
Fair.
Turnabout is fair play.
How the turntables. Yes, I understand. you know, if that's the case, though, Monk, if we're going to go with someone who should be the protagonist in that particular respect, why isn't there a Valkyrie profile Brunhilde?
Because she never showed up in any of the games.
So make a game for her alone. But this is all rails.
Yeah. The point is, in a hypothetical adaptation of Valkyrie profile, if there's anybody who's playing as "quote unquote" the Valkyrie in this situation, it's the GM.
Yeah.
Usually giving out some sort of divine gift. As far as what game to utilize, maybe Scion.
The Scion.
Since even though Scion does the whole thing of you being a child of one of the gods, the certain gods are established to adopt people.
Mm-hmm.
One blatant example they give is Athena. A lot of her "quote unquote" children are ones that she's adopted and given divine gifts to, even though they were technically born from other gods. So all that one would have to do is just expand the gods of the Aesir as far and use that as an alignment setup.
Oof.
Hell, you could just have the setup of the Aesir and the Veneer, and you've got half your work done.
You do.
Use that as an alignment system because I'm going to state this as I've stated in the past. Any attempt to make alignment system into a morality system is doomed to failure.
Yep. But I don't think we need to harp on that particular point.
No.
Yeah, I think pretty much every game that's tried that has proven that to be true.
Well, when it comes to the more litigious fantasy game, its alignment system was a round peg in a square hole.
That's a kind way of putting it.
Well, yeah. Well, like I said, we've harped on that enough very recently, Monk.
Mm-hmm.
Just yesterday, in fact, or in this case 2 days ago. Now that it's after midnight.
Yeah. But next on the list, we've got Wild Arms.
I'm going to just leave this one to you. This was you pandering to you. If the Mana series and Dot Hack were me pandering to me, Wild Arms is you pandering to you.
Yes, it is. Because it's not like we did a whole episode about my love for Wild Arms or anything.
No, there's been no GeekWatch episode of any such nature at all. Not ever.
Regardless, I have considered doing something that's meant to be a kind of tribute to Wild Arms. Um, there is, and even XF did have classes per se, but I'm not entirely sure if I would use the class system that was in XF. Largely because there's certain motifs within Wild Arms that class system does not account for. Um, one of which being, well, the arms, and that is something I think should be accounted for. The other thing is stuff like drifter ranks and the vitality system, which was essentially a HP bank you could drain from between encounters. So that after you got banged up in a fight, you could use that to recover your health. Um, I would the system that I would probably use for it is likely a modified version of Westbound or the Saga system. If it's based on the Wild West, I feel like I have to use cards for this. Especially since with 3 you have everybody in a specific set of archetypes. You know, Julia had Mystic, so allowing items to be used on all. Um, um, Jet had Accelerator. Clive had Lock On, and these have been abilities that have shown up throughout the series. 5 kind of had a class system, but not really. It focused more on its personal skill system. But I do think that utilizing cards for both your skills and for your advancement, as well as I think we'd have to use the hex system. You know, repurpose the shared zones that we saw in Convictor Drive, and instead of having aerializing it, just have it as a set of zones.
Mm-hmm.
Ones that can be shared by ally and enemy alike.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would also probably put a focus rule on some of the stronger abilities where you cannot use these if you've already taken a move action.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that'd be a good way to balance things. And as far as the resource, there's already one right in front of us, just begging to be used, and that's the force point system.
Yep.
I think the bigger question is, should FP be shared the way it was in 5 and the Wild Arms that doesn't exist, or should it be an individual basis?
I think an individual basis would be better.
Because the key thing with it is that it's you always have a pool of 100 points. It starts out at 0 plus your level. Every 25 points you could potentially use a force level ability. Instead, in what which were always some sort of passive. The approach I'm thinking of is using force level as a kind of momentum, i.e., every 25 points you can bank it into force level to level it up and boost everyone's abilities.
You'd have to make earning force, like, you'd want to abstract that down to something more easily tracked, though. Like 25 points to some people that's going to seem like a lot, to others not a lot, depending on how it's obtained and how it's tracked.
I probably wouldn't even use I wouldn't even use 100 points of force. I probably just use 10.
Okay.
And instead of 4 force levels, cap it at 5.
Yeah.
So every 2 points Most abilities are going to cost one or two force points. You can bank 2 to increase the force level.
Yeah, and then acquisition of force points is going to be, other than 0 plus your starting level.
You always get basic attacks always generate force.
Yes.
That's been a thing since day one.
Yes.
Um,
But I'm wondering if there should be other methods.
there's always been items that can give you force points back. And this is one particular case where creating a custom magic system is outright a necessity because of how crest sorcery worked in 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, you were combining two of 4 elemental types to make your spells, and this is also the reason why I was thinking of using a playing card as the primary mechanic, because there were four types of crests that you combined, and well, you've got 4 types of suits in a playing card deck, so if it fits, it fits. If I were to use Saga, I would not do the thing that Saga does where your hand is also your health.
That wouldn't turn out too well.
No. In fact, I'm not even. I'm 50-50 about whether or not I'd have it be a hand or whether or not it's a case where you. Actually no, I take it back. There's the approach I'd probably do is you have a hand much in the same way as the effort pool and Lone Wolf Fists, but if you're feeling lucky, you can do a draw. I draw the top card from the deck, and that's what you have to pick. You don't get any takebacks if you go with the draw option.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a case of you might get something really good, but you might also bust. Dustbound does an interesting approach where everybody has a deck and the deck is your HP, which is something that could be done. I'm not saying that Wild Arms would be an easy one to work with, but I think the issue that I have is that there's a lot of ways it could be done, and I just have to boil it down to a few less.
Mm-hmm.
And of course there's the whole thing with the Guardians, which have been largely consistent throughout. The only one that I would outright have as an NPC is Lucide. Actually, Lucide you can do just about anything with, since all that he cares about is fulfilling desires.
Mm-hmm.
In the first game, he was an enemy for the longest time. In the second game, he was an ally. An ally late into it, but again, fulfilling desires is all he cares about. Also, I might be a bit biased because I love Lucide's design.
That does sound a little bit biased.
Would I have it that there's some unwritten rule that you have to play a opening and ending song for each session? Yes. Yes, I would. I mean, people are going to do that for actual plays anyways. Why not go full speed?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Then on the list we have Xenoblade Chronicles. Okay. First off, Blades of Ether exists. It pretty much does a lot of what I would have done. Where the tricky thing gets in is Blades of Ether is very clearly built around Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3. Truth be told, I'd be a bit hesitant on using 1 as a template. Mainly because of the fact that you have main character syndrome and you have main MacGuffin syndrome with the Monado.
Yeah.
Uh, there's also the fact that there aren't really archetypes that can be built around, whereas with the way the blades that are in 2 and 3, there is something that can be worked around with.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that would probably be the easiest to do, and I did work on it before I ended up losing the data, is X. Give me a Switch port of X, damn it!
Won't happen.
I know, but I can dream, can't I? Plus side, I still have my copy of the original. Yes, I have a Wii. Yes, I have a Wii U. You can shame.
I no longer have my Wii U. I got rid of it.
If it weren't for Chronicles X, I would have gotten rid of mine because that's literally the only game that isn't ported onto the Switch. Aside from all the other games that I have for the Wii U have gotten ported over to other platforms, except Chronicles X.
See, I wouldn't have gotten rid of my Wii U if I weren't unemployed and starving at the time.
Fair. But X has a class system that you can build around. There's also the fact that you're going to be able to that you can make an easy sell on the mechs.
Yep, giant robots are always good.
Now, as far as how I'd utilize the mechs while still having on the ground combat, I'd probably take the approach Cthulhu Tech did. You have two damage tiers.
I was just about to suggest that for the mechs.
I know somebody might say, isn't that the same as mega damage? No, because mega damage is full of bullshit like everything else in Palladium.
No arguments for me. I've spent too much damn time in the Palladium system. Even though I do love the world that was created with Rifts, I just hate the system.
There's a reason why I've told it before, but there's a reason why I bust out laughing when I saw the Savage Worlds conversion of Rifts.
Wait, there's a Savage Worlds? Oh, I must find.
Same thing with Robotech, but I prefer the Robotech game that Strange Machine made, even if it is doing some unorthodox stuff. But Neff, I'm going to DM something to you. You're welcome.
Uh-oh. Oh my. You have become my Lord and Savior.
Flattery will get you everywhere, kid. Because I know what as much as I have issues with Game of Thrones, there is always one line that I seem to be able to use a lot because it is too perfect for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's what I do. I drink and I know things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that does seem to hit the nail right on the head.
Mm-hmm.
And repeatedly, over and over and over.
Yep. But I do think that with Xenoblade Chronicles, I think I'd honestly be more inclined to use X as a base than 2 or 3. Largely because you kind of have the main character issue of could you do a story within the world without the main cast? And I'm not quite sure. With 2, very much no. 3 would be a little bit easier, but not by much.
Hmm.
whereas X, especially since you have a silent protagonist in X, that one's easier to work with.
Yep. Not to mention again, we're trying to divorce things from the actual story of the game if we can, which is why, again, doing one is not a good idea. Everything rides on that story. Period.
Whereas this is also why Wild Arms was such an easy one, because even though all of it is taking place on Filgaia, they don't try and establish a continuity. It's just doing the whole thing of there are many stories in the Wild West.
Yep.
Although I could be a smartass in a few years and just adapt Armed Fantasia when that comes out. But Xenosaga, maybe some elements of the combat system, and that's it. There is no way we can separate the Xenosaga from the story from the games.
Yes. Because it's all very necessary to follow the ensemble cast. You can't even say we're just following Shion or Cosmos.
Mm-hmm. Although I wouldn't be opposed to using Albedo as an NPC if I want to mess with people's heads.
I mean, if you're going to use Albedo, why not just use all of the alchemy guys? Xenosaga, the game based on Gnostica, one of the games most based on Gnostic religion and alchemy.
Yeah, for a while it was the biggest game that was taking notes from Gnosticism, until Persona 5 came around. And for all intents and purposes, the final boss is the Demiurge.
No, he is the Demiurge.
Yeah.
Yaldabaoth is the name of the Demiurge in Gnostic religion.
Yeah. So
which is why you then become Friedrich Nietzsche, manifest Satan, and shoot him in the head.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. Was that spoilers for Persona 5? It's been a few years. Get over it.
Mm-hmm. Then we have Ys. And I love Ys to death, but no. I would not. I might take a few notes here and there when it comes to certain motifs within the Ys series. The problem is it's very hard to separate Ys from Adol.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we've run into two games where they're almost too difficult to be worth adapting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's ironically Xenosaga and Ys.
Yeah. I'm not saying that they'd be unadaptable, but all that I would do for Xenosaga or Ys is take a few motifs and then implement them in other games. But that's not what I consider an adaptation.
Yeah, that's inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Whereas, in truth be told, the main thing I'd probably take from Xenosaga was the bonus slot that was in the first game.
Okay.
But when it comes to, because of the fact that it's focused so much on Adol's journey, Ys can't work without him.
Mm-hmm.
There might be some abilities and the like I might take notes from. But that's as far as I could go.
In some cases, the setting and the sandbox that we could build would only be interesting because they are tied into the characters and the stories they are pushing. Because otherwise, if we take Xenosaga at face value and try to divorce it from characters, you know what game we have, Monk?
What?
Veil of the Void.
Yeah.
Literally, if we divorce the actual characters and plot of Xenosaga from Xenosaga, we basically just have Veil of the Void.
I was tempted to put Xenogears in this list, and then I realized, no, that's not going to work.
The further back you go through the Xeno series, people, the less adaptable they are.
The only thing I could see myself taking from Xenogears is the death blow system.
I can see that. I would take one other thing from it as well, but we already have plenty of systems for it, and that's giant robots.
Yeah.
I love giant robots. What can I say, people? You've already known this, listening to me for nigh on
Save that for
nearly
Friday.
3 years.
Yes,
I know. I know, Monk.
But when it comes, there were a few others that I was considering, but I realized some of them might be easier than others. Shadow Hearts would prove an interesting challenge, but there's no way we could use the Judgment Ring unless we got really cute with a D20 roll.
True.
And because the problem is if we were to utilize it, we would have to do an approach of instead of roll high or roll low, you're rolling for a specific range.
And that's finicky.
Yeah, because the only way I can see myself using it is through the through the action control table or the chart system that you see in Ascendant and Marvel Phase Rip.
Mm-hmm.
You're rolling for a degree of success.
Yes.
That's really it. The magic system would be easier to work with because it's always been based on constellations, and well, fusion is just alternate form setups. I do think the elemental focus of the fusions in Covenant would be the one I'd work with instead of not in Covenant, in From the New World instead of what came before.
Mm-hmm.
But the tricky thing with Shadow Hearts is every character has some subsystem. Wild Arms has this as well, but the subsystems repeat themselves enough that I can work with it.
Yep.
But between the original, Covenant, and From the New World, each character in your party has some sort of subsystem.
Yep. What else did you think of as honorable mentions?
Vagrant Story, I'd say that'd be pretty easy to work with.
Nope. I can see Vagrant Story working pretty well.
Brave Fencer Musashi, no.
No. Mainly because it's already an action-oriented game.
And you can't really do it without Musashi.
Also true.
The World Ends With You.
I could see that one being really fun to develop, but also difficult to develop for.
There's certainly the possibility, and I'd probably...
Well, equipable psychic powers via pins is cool.
Mm-hmm. If I wanted to be an asshole, I might have it that there are certain things that you as the player have to do in order to activate certain pins. But I would probably use Neo as a base instead of the original, mostly because the whole handoff thing with your partner is a little bit too game specific.
Well, I still think you could imitate that without making it a necessity, sort of a team synchronicity thing. That is like an additional bonus that helps out the party if you guys are good at it.
Yeah, I do think that some sort of momentum system should be done, and there has been an attempt as well, officially and unofficially, with Heartbeats in Perfect Sync.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I love, as a side note, and this is just really a side note, I love the fact that in English it's called The World Ends With You, but the name of the game in Japanese is Kono Subarashii Sekai, This wonderful world.
Mm-hmm.
It's I can understand why they didn't translate it to that, because that would probably make less sense than The World Ends With You.
You'd also probably have some people thinking of It's a Wonderful Life.
Or you'd have some people thinking of Konosuba, depending on what time they get these games.
But the bigger reason I'd go with Neo as a basis is just a larger cast to work with.
Yep, and thus more inspiration to spread to a sandbox.
Yeah. If I were to write it, I'd probably have to do a lot of research on Shibuya.
Yeah, Shibuya is a pretty interesting place.
Because when it comes to the characters, we can divorce it, since we have a framework of the party died and they've been put into the Reaper's game.
You're part of the Reaper's game now. Yeah.
And we already have foundations with things like the shonen module for Knights of the Round Academy. Just having different hexes be different memories.
Mm-hmm.
Or have hexes as pins. We can go either way.
Whatever works.
Yeah. I had thought of one other one I was thinking of was Shin Megami Tensei. As in the mainline entries. Now, on one hand, both the physical and the magical abilities have been consistent throughout the series.
Yes.
On the other hand, you have the issue of both demons, demon taming, and demon fusion to contend with.
Yep.
There are archetypes that you can kind of build around, but the fusion thing is where things would get tricky unless we do a hell of a lot of abstracting. There's also the fact that there is a protagonist issue because you're some sort of demon tamer in every instance.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say the one that would probably be the easiest to work with in terms of the mainline entries is probably 4.
Yeah, probably.
I was tempted to say 3, but no, there's no other demi-fiends except you, so 3 is out.
And I'm guessing you haven't played 5 yet to be able to even judge that one.
5 you have the protagonist thing to deal with as well.
I miss right out. You have to go to 3, sir.
But as far as some of the side material when it comes to the Mega 10, Soul Hackers, same problem. Strange Journey, same problems. Actually, Strange Journey is still somewhat character focused. So no, I repeat what I said. Raido Kuzunoha, as much as I like his design, no. That one's out of the picture. But Persona, that's been done a few times, especially including one called the Velvet Book, which is a hack of monsters and other childish things that actually worked fairly well. There was also one that used Powered by the Apocalypse, but it as much as I loved the look of it, it had a problem where your playbook was the Arcana, but some of these spells were very specific to certain Arcana. Like if I wanted to be a magician who's using Zeo spells, I would have to do some hacking. I can do it. It's just the principle of things.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, there is a protagonist problem in the form of the wild card. Although the Q games kind of solved this with with the idea of a primary and a secondary persona.
Mm-hmm.
The primary one is the one you're stuck with. The secondary is one that can be equipped. Because the idea with the Q games was that they were dungeon crawlers where the whole party had an aspect of the wild card.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as which persona to use as a basis, all 3, 4, and 5 both fit and don't. Although of the 3 of them, I'd say 5 would be the hardest to work with, because you have a protagonist with too much baggage and one who should not be silent.
Mm-hmm.
But 4 you've got the overlay of your new in town, some city kid now out in the countryside. Easy to work with, especially since it revolves more around mysteries than anything else.
Yeah.
3, I think the setup was that you were a transfer student coming into the school, and that just stumbled onto C's. I'd say between the 3 of them, 4 is the one that would probably make the best starting template. And it's, although as tempting as it would be to do some sort of archetype system with the Arcana, that would be a lot of work. And you'd also have to figure out what the hell you're going to do with the Fool.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is kind of a motif when it comes to monsters that lean towards certain Arcana, but it's a bit broad. So Persona is a case where it'd be both easy and difficult to work with. Though once again, I'm not doing the whole your physical actions drain HP.
Yeah.
No, we're putting in a stamina system. That's what your physical skills are going to be using. End of story. And I had thought of like Rune Factory, but then I realized Ryutama. If somebody wants to do Rune Factory, Ryutama is where they should go. One that would be an interesting challenge would be Chrono Cross.
I I knew you were going to bring that one up.
Especially with the element grid, and there isn't really archetypes to work with the grid, but instead I'd probably have it that you're going classless. Every time you level up, you can add one more slot onto the grid, which can be either a slot in a level you already have, or a new tier.
Mm-hmm.
And of course use that to slot in elements that you either do or don't have affinity with.
Yep.
And this is actually one case where I could see this seeing a bit on the Vancian model, because even though techniques can only be used once, unlike the typical Vancian model, you get all of those techniques back at the end of the fight.
Yep.
So, plus there's also the whole thing of the light, medium, and heavy attack approach, which is part of that loop of using that not only to do physical damage, but also to get levels so you can cast.
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't be easy, but I think it would be an interesting challenge. And I didn't even get into the whole elemental stuff and the way fields work, and the
Yeah,
fact that that's necessary for summoning. In fact, using summoning elements is not going to be easy.
yeah.
Um, as far as trigger, I actually would I would actually just say Sword World's that way. Go have at it. Because the only thing I could see myself utilizing from Chrono Trigger is the tech system,
Yeah.
and even with that, you'd have to. I think text would have to be something that another case of create and effect kind of things,
Mm-hmm.
which is honestly why I wouldn't use Chrono Trigger, because the idea of figuring out how you're going to do dual and triple techs, that's going to be tricky to say the least. And I know some would say, what about the time travel in Trigger?
What about it?
Time travel is a narrative conceit.
Yeah, that's why I said, what about it?
Uh, the reason why I put the time travel in Titanfall 2 on such a high pedestal is for the one chapter where you have that device, you are using time jumping actively in how you engage with the level.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of games that utilize time travel don't do that. It is a narrative device, not instead of a mechanical one. And let's see, I'm trying to think if there's
I think we can actually probably end the lightning round there, Monk.
because those are the only ones I can think of. There might be some more that'll crop up in my head later, but the key thing that I want to establish with this is, as we've stated in the past, adapting an IP into tabletop is not necessarily as easy as people think it is.
Not easy, but it's also not impossible.
No, it's just that it's going to require a specific approach. Otherwise, all that you end up is just with a glorified reskin. Um, which is the reason why this is the reason why I still wholeheartedly object to the claims of using the world's most litigious role-playing game for quote-unquote all kinds of fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that you can only think of when you think fantasy as a one-way street. Uh, and incidentally, you can add that to the reasons why I don't get on with the OSR, because I want to run weeb shit. The OSR does not support me running weeb shit.
OSR can suck a dick.
I know.
I believe it's already doing that.
Yeah, their own. I know. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of old school style games that I like, but the old school mindset, is one that I do not endorse. Especially since, as I've said in the past, and will say again, the biggest problem with the OSR is that it's called the OSR. That it is
Yep.
an identity.
Rather than just a descriptor.
Mm-hmm. This is also why I'm perfectly fine with the idea of retro clones, just not the quote unquote old school.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since I don't feel like doing a poor man's Tolkien pastiche till the end of time.
Yes, I would like to branch out. Thank you.
But that's going to do it for this particular episode. This was an interesting one to explore. And I can hear somebody in the distance going, "What about Undertale?" That is never going to happen. I am never adapting Undertale or Earthbound. But as far as what's coming down the pipe, I will be hopefully interviewing Underground Oracle on Tuesday, Wednesday, Mark McKinnon is coming back because we've got more Anime 5e to talk about. Thursday, I've got Nick Huisman, aka the guy who's developing Heavy Gear 4th Edition. Which is why I said in the comments earlier, I'm 10 steps ahead, folks. Friday will not be Faith in terms of Valley of the Judge, but rather Steel Hearts. Saturday I'll be interviewing Lost Heaven Art on his Abaddon game, which both utilizes cards and is heavily inspired by Darkest Dungeon. Sunday I'll be doing the interview with Ferrucchio that I had planned on doing last weekend. It's just that he pulled a Mume. He forgore. And that is going to be the plan for this week. Obviously, card subject to change, but I'm looking forward to all of what's coming. So until next we meet, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.